Welcome back. Today we're going to look at how to parse strings. And the first thing is, if we look at getLine, normally use getLine with like this, where you have a string and you say getLine, and either you're using getLine with CN or you're using getLine with a file. And when you use getLine, it gets one entire line. Basically, it reads all the way till it gets to a /n, a carriage return. We can also use getLine with a delimiter. So in this case, you can see we're reading from our input file. We're reading one element. And if we put a comma, if our function is or if our file is separated by commas, then we can specify which character we want to read to. In this case, if with a comma separated value file, this would read just to the comma. If you had a tab delimited, you could use a /t. It would be something like this, /t, and that could be in here if you were reading to the tab. But often our files are comma delimited. So let's say we have this getLine. Let's say we have this file here, and we can see that we have a number of values separated by commas. Here we have 12:15 a.m., then a comma, 63.5, then a comma, 41.2, then a comma, all the way through. So this is a comma separated value file. If we wanted to read just 12:15 a.m. into one element, if we did this, that's what we would get. It would set 12:15 a.m. into one element. So this value here would go into that variable. So the comma is what we're reading to. And you notice that it will not bring in the comma itself. It just brings in the values up to that comma. It will consume this comma and take it out of the file, though. And then the next one will start reading with 63.5. So that's one way of reading one element at a time. And if you put this in a loop, or if you put this in a file, you can put multiple get lines and read them into each element you want to get into that value. And this get line with a delimiter works very well for text files because, if you read from a text file, everything comes in as a string. So it makes sense to read it in as a get line first. Now the question happens though, let's say, we were reading some of these numeric values. How do we convert those into numbers? Well, this is called string parsing, and there's a couple functions that we have for strings that can be useful. One is the substring function, and what the substring function does is if you apply it to a string, it'll read a value. It'll read starting with this position and this number of characters. It'll just extract just a portion of a string. So sometimes this can be a good way to bring things in. And on ch6Part6.com, we have an explanation and a demonstration of how that works. You can see here where they're reading in a string, or in this case, they're just assigning it. And then if you take the substring of 3, 5, that will get 0, 1, 2, 3. And then 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. This will extract think from that substring. And then if you want, you can also, there's also a find function. If you look for a string inside of a string, the find function will return where that's located, and the position of live will be however many characters are over here. And then if you just, with the substring, if you just put a position and you don't indicate a number of characters, it'll read from that position all the way to the end. So those are two useful functions that you might use when working with strings. But often what we really want to do is convert strings to numbers. And there's a couple ways we can do this. One is we can use the atof and atoi functions. And what ATOI does is it takes a string and converts it into a number, but it can't. Well, it doesn't take a string. It takes a character array. So this is kind of so if you pass in a string buffer to the ATOI function, it'll look at those characters, and if those characters can be made into a number, it'll convert them into a number. You can also have ATOF, which will convert it to a float, and there's also an ATOD, which will convert the buffer to a double. So given the code below, convert this character array into or given the code below, convert the buffer into a float and assign it into a variable called myFloat. So think of the, so pause the video, think of the answer, and then hit continue. So we want to, we have a variable called myFloat, and we're just going to convert it to a float. So ATOF and pass in buffer. And then in this case, sometimes though you have a string and you want to convert that into a number. So we can use the cstring method to take a string and convert it to a buffer. So in this case, let's say we have a string called some text and we want to convert it into a buffer. You could use the cstring method, and remember that a character array is basically just a pointer to the first array in that character array. So we actually define our character array as a constant char pointer and then whatever name we want. So in this case, this will take the string and then make char message point to it and treat it as a character buffer. And so you could use that to make a float. So a simple way of using ATOF or ATOI with a string would be just to say string, whatever the name of the string, dot cstring, which is convert this to a character array, and then this will actually convert your string directly into a float. So this would be the format if you wanted to use ATOF or ATOI or ATOD with a string. However, there's an easier way of doing that, and with later versions of C++, we can use the STOI, STOF, and STOD, and rather than converting char arrays, the STOI, STOF, and STOD functions will directly convert a string to a number, and they're used simply like this. So you have a string, some text, you get some text from the user, say, and you want to convert that into an int. So you would then just say whatever my int is equal to the STOI of that string, and that will convert that string into a number and store it in this numeric variable. Same thing for float. You can use STOF. There's also STOD, which will convert to a double. And there's an article on that here in C++. It's only available in C++ 11 and on. So that's why we kind of show you the STOA way of doing it. But if you are in 11 later on, you probably should use the STOI rather than the ATOI or ATOD functions. And this talks about some of the differences with C++ 11. So let's write code to declare a variable to store a person's age. Pick the best type for that variable. Also write the code to convert a string variable called age_str into a number and store that value into the age variable. So pause, think about the answer, and then write it down, and then hit continue. So we're going to declare a variable, declare someone's age, and so maybe we, int would probably make sense, and maybe we'll just call it age. And then, let's say that, we would get an input from the user. And, we could maybe get line. So we'll do a get line into using cn into, and we would need something to store it as a string initially. So we're going to create a string called age str, for example. So now we've got the age in as an str, and we need to convert that now into an int. So age would equal stoi of age str. And this would get the input on the person's year, age, bring it in as a string, and then do the conversion to parse this string into an int and store it into this integer variable. So that completes my review of how to parse strings into numbers. Thank you very much.